Everyone, this is Chris Grosso with the Indie Spiritualist podcast, and my guest today is Tori Olds. Tori, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yes, I am. My nerd heart is really excited about this conversation because I am all about the therapeutic modalities and the work that you're doing with I find it kind of cutting edge, more experiential. That really warms my heart with this stuff. So let me read your bio quickly for our audience, and we're going to dive into all things therapy and goodness like that. So Tori Olds, PhD, is a licensed psychologist in private practice in Austin, Texas. She's the co-founder of Deep Eddy Psychotherapy, one of the largest training and counseling centers in Texas, with over 250 clinicians. She specializes in the integration of experiential approaches to therapy and leads 7 international training groups on this topic each week. She has a passion for translating complex psychology concepts for the public, which she does through her YouTube channel. And that is how I found you, Tori. And that is why I fell in love with your work so quickly, was that last part where you translate these complex psychology concepts. I found you because I'm somewhat new to IFS and parts work, Richard Schwartz's stuff. And I had been reading about it and starting to pick it up. But the way you started to talk about that really made it click for me. And then I started exploring your other videos, and it's like, oh, wow. And I've been in therapy for like 20 years. So first of all, your YouTube channel, if somebody wants to find it, just Tori Olds, TORIOLDS. Okay. We'll have a link for that on our page.
Great.
If you're into therapy and you're listening to this or watching this, go check it out, please. So Tori, before we jump into some topics, I would love to just get a little background on you. What led you to the work that you're obviously so passionate about today? Tell me a little bit about you and what brought you to this.
Yeah, it's such a great question. Thank you. I was raised by 2 depth, more psychoanalytically oriented, maybe psychologists. My mom in the 90s got more into experiential work. So I had a grandmother figure who had started an experiential form of therapy that was for groups. So not many people know about it. It's called system-centered therapy. But I was really struck by watching my mom's transition from being a little bit in her head, fast-paced, brilliant, and like happy and sparkly. But as a child, even so, we all have different temperaments, and I really have always been interested in slowing down. Yeah, I can talk fast, and I probably will today.
You and me both.
When it's time to slow down and go deep, I like having the space to process things. I'm more internal focused than like wanting to be all active in the outer world. Outer world's a little nuts. So
that it is.
But I kind of watched her, I don't know, like learn how to be more in the moment through, we weren't calling it mindfulness yet, but it looked like, tracking what we're feeling and being exploring how that feels in the body, having feet on the floor. And I just got really into this is interesting and not enough people are doing this. Even in high school, it was like my interest was personal growth. Like everyone had I did music too. So I did music and academics. But as people had these after school activities, I would be looking for the elders and you know what I mean? It's a spiritual woman that was doing wild spiritual stuff. So we would turn, drum and crawl around her floor. I don't know, just stuff. And then, this beautiful woman, other grandmother figure I had who'd been in the Holocaust, really in a concentration camp, but was also saw energy, and we had a vision together one time. I was just very interested in finding elders, either in the sort of more spiritual space or just in the science space, how to be with emotion. I remember if I was mad, if my dad said something in high school that hurt my feelings, I would make him sit with me with his feet on the floor. And I would explore okay, that hurt and it brought up anger. And I'm having an impulse in my fist to punch you. I'd really go through that whole thing. This is in the 90s when not that many people were talking about mindfulness yet even. But I was yes, this is and we have to feel our feelings. I just remember being really like passionate about, especially the feelings thing. I've evolved a little past that, although I still think it's really important. But in college, I was trying to bring in trainers, and I went to this little college called Middlebury, and it's a great college, but the psychology department even tried to block me from bringing in some trainings because they were so like experiential. And I remember
Sure.
the head of the department turning to me and goes, "Emotions are dangerous." And I was just like, okay, this I have to change. So anyway, so I was doing a lot of meditating, like a lot of meditating at the time as well. And but I also have an interest in science. So I've been really lucky. I've had such great mentors. I mean, just because I learned about that. I learned how to find the good mentors. So I didn't waste time, after grad school, after getting my PhD, which was, you can learn some things with that, but not a ton, honestly, in grad school. And so I started studying Diana Fosha's work and Peter Levine, did somatic experience training. Stan Tatkin, who's still a dear friend of mine. I was one of his first students. So we did a number of years of intensive with Stan Tatkin. He's a couples therapist.
Oh, I know Stan. Yeah.
Yeah. He's such a good guy. And Secker. So our wonderful Bruce Secker, who I want to mention. So is that okay for me just to kind of keep going?
Please, I'm there's things I want to interject, but I'm rolling with you. Please,
okay, well, you'll get to the interrupt me later. But
yeah.
So Bruce, he is he's a less known, he's not as famous in our field in as much as he's not a marketing guru. He's not the type to have an Instagram account. Let me put it that way,
Sure.
And yet people who are famous therapists know of him. Like when you kind of begin exploring these waters, you hear mention of this guy, Bruce Secker, and many people really respect him as being one of the just most important voices in our field. And what he's been trying to do is find what is a core way of understanding it from the perspective of the brain too. What happens when we have a breakthrough, a healing, whether it's a spiritual breakthrough, therapeutic breakthrough, that moment of what he calls transformational change, when something was a problem up until this moment, and then something shifts, which we can talk about what that shift is if you want, but I know you do. And then we just feel sort of liberated from the trap, like the need to do this, or the shame, or the thinking, the self-critic, or whatever it is. It's sort of like, oh, wow. And there's a sort of decisive moment of transformation. He got very interested in that. And he was really working to kind of create it more consistently in his own therapy work, and tracking sort of technically and therapy wise, what to do to create that, figuring out what's happening in the brain when those moments happened. I just was really lucky to be able to, the last few years, have him as a very close mentor. By that, I mean, we have 2 groups that we co-lead. So I'm like regularly, like the 2-hour groups, some group, maybe at least every other week, where I'm like really getting to pick his brain and learn from him. So that's why I made the transformation series. I think you were saying you watched that on YouTube a few years ago, like as I was getting into his work. And
So thank you. I really appreciate that, because it's palpable when I watch your videos, the passion with which you speak about these topics. And that's why I was so drawn to your videos. It's like, wow, she really gives a shit about this stuff. Like when you talk about, I remember a few times you say, I'm paraphrasing, like, the world I want to live in the future, we're doing these things. And I was like, because imagine if we were in the healing that's taking place. And now more than ever with what's going on, it's scary times. So but thank you for that. So I resonate with a lot. For me, I wasn't quite feelings, though I felt deeply. I was empathic before I knew what that was as a child. But punk rock, skateboarding, hip hop, counterculture in the 90s. To me, I needed something more than face. What didn't resonate. Give me soul and depth and spirit. And then that led me to my teacher, Ram Dass, who, I'm probably familiar with him. And then also Ken Wilber, he's been a wonderful teacher to me in his work, and a lot of others, Gabor Mate, Peter Levine, like you mentioned, so many, the somatic work that he does. Anyway, so to me, it was just a natural progression from punk and hardcore and all this
Mhm.
counterculture into spirituality and therapy. And I appreciate you mentioned science too,
Yeah.
physics. I'm lay understanding, but what I get, it's like, oh shit, like they
Yeah.
are saying a lot of these people what a lot of the ancient rishis from India were saying thousands of years ago in a scientific language. That's very real. Like, it's pretty
Yeah.
cool to me. Not
Complexity
Pollyannish, not
theory.
woo woo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So I
Totally.
just wanted to
Mhm.
identify in my own way with what you were
Mhm.
saying. I
Yeah.
also did watch a video, one of your first ones, where you played guitar and sang.
Yeah.
And because you mentioned being a musician, it was
Yeah.
beautiful. It was about, I
Thank
think it was
you.
the self compassion song.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that really touched me too, because that's something I've worked on for
Yeah.
a long time
Yeah.
and still a
Yeah.
work in progress. But
Yeah.
thank you for putting words and
You're
voice
welcome.
to that. It's very nice.
Yeah. Thanks.
So, okay, that's it. There's probably more, but let's dive into some of
Okay.
this work. Plenty of notes. So,
Okay. Good.
yeah, I figure for listeners, what I like to do is kind of use the format of that transformational video series, which, in all fairness, was done about 5 years ago.
Mhm.
So, please update me on some of the notes I made. But, I feel
Sure.
like this will be a good blueprint for people who aren't familiar with this stuff.
Sure.
Put it on the radar, hopefully, get more people excited about it. Because, yeah, I'm with you. Like, this seems to me one of our feel like Star Wars, you're our only hope, Obi-Wan. Like, you're our only hope, save,
Yeah.
like
I think
experiential
so
therapy.
too. Yeah. Right.
So I'm going to dive in. Your first video, you talk about our emotional reactions. That's what it's called. What are they based on?
Mm.
I don't want to steal your thunder. Just a couple of
Oh,
notes. You make the case in that one that emotional reactions are actually, in an interesting way, logical, noticing they are based on lived experiences. And then you also know the processes aren't bad, and we can learn how to interface with them and understand how we were wired and adjust it to be adaptive. And then, I go on and on, but one thing I did bold print here was if we can appreciate that our emotional issues rest on learned associations and expectations of how the world works, then we can see that our emotional issues to a degree really make sense. Like that was the
yeah.
thing, watching your video, so many light bulb moments for me. So
Mhm.
please, wherever you'd like to go with
Yeah,
it.
let's see how to start that. It reminds
Yeah.
me of something that Bruce sometimes says is like he doesn't even use the word disorder
Mm,
because he's like everything in the inner world is ordered.
sure.
It can
Got it.
feel chaotic, it can feel dysfunctional, but it's the brain just trying to survive.
Right.
And the primary way we learn to do that, or we evolve to do that, is through learning. So we pay attention to what we're experiencing, and through our experiences, we learn templates. This is in neuroscience, they call them predictions.
Hmm.
We learn, is this good, bad, neutral? What can I expect from this? Like someone coming close to me, having an emotion, setting a boundary, trying to speak my truth. We do different things, we see different things, and we learn, is it safe or dangerous, basically? Well,
Yes.
not safe, dangerous. Will it get me love? Will it get me rejection? Because that matters a lot to us as well, especially from parents and attachment figures.
Right.
So we look at things, we see, okay, when this happens or when I do this, this is the outcome. And our brain is absorbing like a sponge. Okay, where are the dangers or problems that I need to solve? Then it's also absorbing like a sponge or developing really quickly and then templating. How do I solve those problems?
Mm,
How do I protect myself from those dangers? How do I deal with these issues? Now we're mostly young when that's happening, so it's not like we're slowing down to really consciously think about it, but we're just sort of through trial and error, moving through life, seeing what things mean, learning through experience, absorbing. Okay, when this happens, I need to do this. Like it just makes sense. It's actually you in school sometimes they actually talk about conditioning. That's basically what I'm talking about. It's like conditioning,
right.
operant conditioning. We like just like with rats in a lab when they hear a bell, if they get a shock,
Yeah.
they associate the bell and the shock. Now that's not logical. There's no reason a bell needs to be dangerous, right? Should be associated with a shock.
Right.
But if it is in my lived experience, my lower brain, we used to call it our limbic system. Now we tend to call it just subcortical because it's more than just limbic. But, anyways, our subcortical,
Sure.
emotional brain, however you want to call it, is the part that is there to notice those like connections, to make those associations. Oh, in the past, this meant this. So I assume the future is going to play out like the past.
Mm,
Our logical brain doesn't do that. It just
right.
thinks logically, like, tell me, are bells dangerous? No. Why would they rationally be dangerous? It can like get around things much more fluidly. But our deeper brain is like, okay, for me, the proof is in the pudding. what happened before. Some people think of it as like unconscious statistical analysis. Like it's constantly analyzing things and saying, what's the probability based on my past experience that this is going to go well if I do this or that,
Right.
But the problem with that part of our brain is that it's, well, there's many difficulties of it. It really, those can really stabilize and be problematic learnings, but it's just not conscious. And it's not so much because it's the unconscious. Although, I mean, I do like to use the word unconscious. We have an unconscious mind, I think, but like,
Right.
it's not because of suppression or repression. We can do that. That is a learning that can happen, and we can specifically try not to go places for emotional reasons. But just by default, it's by default. It's like this is how we are wired, is to have these things be non-conscious.
Right.
Just for the sake of saving energy and time. Go ahead.
And are these you, in those videos, at least, you talked about schemas. Is that what we're talking about here?
Totally.
Do you still use that language?
I do.
Okay.
There's no right or wrong language. So I said neuroscientists might say predictions,
Sure,
concepts. There's different things. Bruce Ecker tends to use the word schema, so I use that. But we've used the word mental model and attachment. They'll use the word mental model, emotional learning.
Yeah.
So whatever you imprint, whatever you want to call it.
Cool.
Association, even. But I think when I use the word schema, I really mean that two-part of the knowing, the emotional knowing, prediction of some kind of problem or danger, and then the knowing of how to address or solve that or prevent it, whatever that problem or danger is. So there's really kind of every schema has sort of those two pieces.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And see, like, again, I've had some pretty cool people on my podcast. I'm not going to lie, but like, I really got nervous about this one today. I'm like, I get to talk to her. Yay. I'm transparent to a fault also.
Yeah,
Thank you. That was so helpful. So from there, you go on to the next video. How do we experience, or how do experiences shape identity? Why your issues make complete sense. And I'll just if I can give a little bit. And then couple of notes I made was you talk about irrational and self-defeating behaviors and how that on some level, our brains actually do believe that those choices or behaviors will end up best for us or for our group. And the reason for this is because it's rooted in experience, like you're kind of mentioning. That's one other thing I liked about this series is each video you pick up where you left off and you give us that refresher. So if I tend to do that here, it's just, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
But from there, another thing I highlighted a bold print was, if now, as an adult, you are struggling, it is not because your brain has done a bad job taking its experiences and all of those data points and finding the patterns and making the meaning. It is simply that those experiences that you've had, those data points, are a skewed sample. In other words, the world you started out in, which is most powerfully your family of origin, when your brain is learning these patterns, figuring out what to expect, how to respond from life, the world differs in important ways from the world at large. I kind of paraphrase a little. There's more, but
right. That's why we get so effed up.
Yes.
Right. They seem so sometimes problematic. These problematic patterns. It's because we probably at one point actually had to do that thing. Like we really did need to find a way to numb our feelings.
Right. Yes.
That was going to be adaptive. If we didn't do that, we were in trouble.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe as a kid, we don't do that by drinking, but as soon as we got old enough, we do. We find something. It's still based on an early learning that says you better not feel this, or I'm just giving that as an example because it's a common one. But that is at some point that was adaptive. Like your brain was doing a good job trying to protect you.
Yeah.
And manage and actually just stay sane. Because if we let there be too much fear in our system, it can really destabilize our whole system. And then we can't learn and go to school and have friends and just have a semblance of a life and development.
Right.
So there's things the brain has to do to say, how do I create enough stability inside? Give it, even if there's chaos outside and it's freaky. And by the way, shame is one way we do that, which we can talk about.
Sure.
But it allows things to be a little, so we have, those are like valid learnings. It wasn't that our brain did a bad job figuring out what's real and how I should respond. But then it's almost like the rules changed. Like it's like if you learned how to play chess or something with one set of rules, and then you realize your teacher was teaching you the wrong rules. Like you like go play with somebody else, and they're like, "Oh, I don't play that way." Like what? I learned these rules, And I think that's why but again, all this is playing out unconsciously, so we're just genuinely probably just confused. But I think when we were evolving, it was not normal for the rules to change like that. Like we probably were staying with the same people, the same physical context, the same level of technology, the same
Right.
group, like probably whatever we did when we were a child, like learned to do, probably was adaptive when we were an adult. It's just like,
Yeah.
But like now we're moving on from abusive families and trying to like act, like adapt, like open up to the possibility of a different kind of relationship.
Yep.
We're moving cultures, we're moving across the world. We're like trying to, we were religious, now we're not. I mean, like all sorts of changes. And our emotional brain is just not set up to like update that quickly.
Right.
And so there are things, obviously, we're pointing toward ways it actually can. It does have some mechanisms to actually do the updating, but it doesn't just like by default easily, fluidly update with every new, it's like, no, I learned this was a problem. I learned how to, especially if it's around danger.
Right.
I learned lots of danger and I'm supposed to do
Right.
that. And you're just intellectually going to tell me because you read a book that it's good to be vulnerable or something, or like
Right.
you should love yourself. Like, I think mostly the brain cares about the emotional knowings because those are actually more that you can't fool me. It's like, I know what I saw. And that's kind of the more limbic, the
Right.
subcortical. Yeah.
So two things that are coming up for me here, and there's still some other notes. One is I had a therapist maybe about 10 years ago. He was a great guy. One thing that I remember very clearly that just came up for me while you were sharing was I mentioned to you before we started, I'm a person in recovery from alcohol, and it's not been linear. I've had years and then not. And actually, I want to get your opinion on some things later on that and healing modalities. But he said to me, again, in his own way, he said, Chris, your drinking was a form of self-compassion.
Yes, absolutely.
He said, and I love my parents. I'm very blessed that I have two wonderful parents, but I was the firstborn. My dad grew up in foster care without a father figure. They did the best they could. They were very young, but we were poor. But looking back, I see, and that's something Gabor Mate helped me understand is when you look at a relatively, even though I look at it, I wasn't raped, wasn't molested, wasn't abused, no capital T traumas. But then he's like, even the little T traumas, those can be very traumatic. You're a child, the parents that love you, if they're arguing, if you feel alone. So the point he made there that helped me, and this is a side to a side, was, we look back at those experiences currently from a more, rational state of mind, a more evolved brain. But he helped me realize when you're that age, you're not processing it that way. So sure, in retrospect now, not a big deal, but we still have that within us, and that's part of that wound.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't know. Just again, side tangent. I don't know if you have anything to say.
I love so much what you said. I mean, one, I think that is something we're learning not to minimize, even just emotional neglect, basically. I don't know how, but it doesn't always look like trauma from the outside or abuse, or not that your parents are abusing you, but it doesn't look like anything dramatic because your physical needs are getting met or whatever. But although even for you, those might not have always been easy to rest into if you're having poverty, so like there's a lot of stress of that. That's one. And then two, I mean, having parents who are young and distracted and poor and stressed and preoccupied, that just rests on like, boy, one of the main thing our brain pays attention to is, are we connected to people who can take care of us and who seem important and okay?
Yeah.
That's so foundational for our survival as little babies.
It is.
We really care about that. So we're learning, we can get a lot of fear about just not being picked up in time when we're crying. I mean, that seems like such a small thing. A lot of fear. So anyway, so yes, I love that part. I love what you said about the drinking was compassion.
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a near and dear topic to me, but I really, I have a very deep pathologizing view of the brain and mind. And I really do believe everyone is doing their best.
Yeah.
And it's not just like a touchy-feely perspective from me. In fact, it's just so much more logical and science-based.
Yeah.
That the brain, I mean, if I just had to say it really simply, and I think most people would agree with this probably, they'd be like, yeah, how could it not be this? The brain is trying 100% every second.
Wow.
And do you know what I'm saying? Could you imagine why it wouldn't?
Yeah.
Like, how could it not?
Yeah.
Such a simple But somehow I've never heard someone say that. And like, I feel like I want to get that message out more of like, yeah, even if you are not trying, that's trying. Like, even if your brain learned in this context, I can't keep trying and failing because it'll crush my spirit too much. So I've got to pull back. That's a strategic thing. It may
Right.
look like laziness on the surface, but I can tell you that there has never been an ounce of laziness in a human being. We are not lazy.
Wow. Wow.
Do you know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah, I do. Yes.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
okay, things that like I've never actually thought about, but
Yeah.
yeah, makes perfect
Yeah.
sense. Again, going back to your bio, making these sometimes difficult topics
Yeah.
so accessible.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you,
You're
Tori.
welcome. Yeah. You're
Um,
welcome.
one other thing that came up for me, and again, I want to jump back into this part, but this wasn't something I planned on talking about, but it just came to mind while you were sharing about, as we're learning, in our environment as children and what's normal. And then we get older and that is part of the problem is we have these learned things and we'll talk about the language around that too. I
Mhm.
made notes on that. But something that just came up to me is, interesting times right now, right? Kind
Yeah.
of scary depending on who
Very
you are.
yeah, totally.
So I have two nieces, they're 9 and 11. Still obviously very impressionable. And I'm thinking of them right now. And I'm thinking of the children. This
Mhm.
is conjecture. I understand that. But like, if things do go batshit crazy off the rails, which it seems like they could, and I'm not making this a political conversation, I'm just
Yeah,
saying
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
environment
A lot
wise.
of people are scared of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't try to like, dive into any of it. It's we'll see
Mhm.
what happens.
Yeah.
But signs kind of
Yeah.
point in that direction. So where I'm
Mhm.
going with this is the children right now, that are going to be growing up that already grew up in COVID, wearing masks is a
Mhm.
completely different world, as if
Yeah.
there wasn't enough shit for them already. Now they're going to, we'll see what happens, but let's say it does, like things go off the rails. What again, conjecture, but what do you see as a society like in years to come, with kiddos that are growing up with all of this around them? Obviously, normal, what we know as normal, which I know is a very loose word, is
Mhm.
not going to be normal, and it hasn't been for them. So, is that anything you've thought about or talked about?
I think we all are kind of thinking about it. I don't know if I have more insight than the average person would, or
Sure.
maybe, but yeah, it is fascinating. I've said most things are kind of dialectical in my mind, where I can see it
Hmm.
one side and then the other, and it's always like a tension between two things.
Sure.
On the one hand, it's like like we can look back to history and be like, well, we've been through hard things and overcome
Right.
them. And also, we're probably in the best moment of being human ever, like the
Right.
safest ever in all of our ancestry. And somehow we've lived, like all of that. Like there's kind of that perspective, like that kind of like, okay. And then it's really true that there's some things that are really new, like
Yeah.
because of technology, basically, because of how
Right.
interconnected we are and how powerful we are. It's like we couldn't F it up that bad if we didn't have if we had sticks or something. Like now
Yeah.
we really powerful things at our
Yeah.
disposal. So everything's like charged right now. But I have no intuition of how it's going to go, honestly. I mean,
Sure.
I tend to definitely not doomsday because one, it's just not productive. But also, I just do not think we know. There's been so many times when we've had things be worse and then we learn from them. It's like
Yeah.
that's the human growth, that's the humanity's growth. So
Yeah.
maybe of course, this could be as a defense, but a healthy one.
Yeah.
Like I'm holding, like that's how I'm having to hold it is like, okay, we've got it. This is us eating our vegetables. Like have a hard thing. It's not going to be fun. I hope we can move it toward learning.
Mm.
Like, can we really? Sometimes you have to see real evidence,
Right.
test the theory, really see what happens, learn from it. But I will say, my little personal contribution is this other piece is like, if, it comes back to this message we are talking about the brain trying, that is just something, again, ever since I was young, I was like, if we could just see that everyone's doing their best.
Yeah.
And even on not this is a conversation about politics, but even on that level, like so many of our problems, I think, are because we don't know that. And so instead of staying curious, we like moralize.
Mm.
It's like, how did that person get to think that Trump is, or whatever, like, like, what was their path? And like, could we talk? We sort of like on both sides, I think, have like kind of talked about the other in disrespectful ways, and then that puts more
Absolutely.
fuel in the fire, and then we like sound clips, and then it becomes a drama.
Right.
And then once we stop talking, we're all effed because like now we don't have a relationship. Like you have to have a relationship together.
Absolutely.
And then you can build, some kind of common understanding or compromise or something. But I think one of the things that I do is I think that's a missing piece. I get so like people know way more about politics than I do. Smart things. I mean, it's like I'm so stunned by people's intelligence, and then I do feel that this point is a little lacking, given that it's scientific. It's not touchy-feely. It's very logical and clear, and it's like so essentially a missing piece. I think like that we should just all learn in school and learn to look at each other without judgment.
Agreed. And I'm right there with you. The last thing I think we need is more division. I don't care what side you fall on. Let's still be human with one another and kind. And so thank you. I really appreciate that. Let's bring it back in. Still on that video, there was another note that, let's see, I bold printed, so I wanted to share it. It said, you were talking about, let's see, the truth is the world you learn or adapt to is not the world or reality that you're retrying to create for yourself, which is a big problem for the brain. Started to talk about that a little bit already. But here's the bold part. Said the rub is that our brain, if left to its own devices, doesn't really update its view of reality. The whole personal growth mission is a new thing, evolutionary for the brain, and it's tricky for it. That was when you said, it's like, wow, that's right. This whole thing is. I never thought of that. Thank you. And then just a little more, you say, it upsets you, and I appreciate this too. It said you personally upsets you to hear people judging themselves without exploring deeper what truly is driving that behavior. The question is, what experiences taught my brain it's imperative to do that thing or avoid doing that other thing?
Yeah.
And then one last one, and then I'll let you go. This is a quote. If you're suffering, it's not because there's anything wrong with you, but rather your early childhood experiences required you to adapt in ways that have some huge costs. So, and then you go on in the next video, I made note, there are clear steps to unlock the brain. So if you're listening, we're going to get to those. But so resolution skills, those are so important. But yeah, so please, anything to say on that, those notes?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's kind of what we've been talking about. It's just, it's just, that's how we evolved is to learn and then assume that what we learned will continue. Cool. And where we're heading, I see you setting us up for is, until 20 years ago, we thought that once something was imprinted like this, what we'd say imprinted in what's called implicit memory.
Yes.
Implicit memory, like example would be muscle memory, which is sometimes why I say like, I think of like psychological muscle memory. Like a lot of us are just moving through the world, like knowing how to be based on like almost this like psychological muscle memory.
Yeah.
But muscle memory is a version of implicit memory, but so is fear conditioning. Like when you do the rats in the lab and you have a bell and then a shock, they thought once you did that conditioned response, you couldn't uncondition that fear.
Right.
Like once you have a phobia, that's a phobia. Like it's not, you can't undo it. You can do extinction training, which sort of like builds up these other networks that know it's safe, and that can temporarily sort of suppress the fear response, but it will come back under stress. Like they thought that once those neuronal connections are made, which it is kind of everything really is, but it is a pattern of neural firing in the brain that's like set up, wired together kind of. Sure. They thought you can like undo that knowing. Okay. And about 20 years ago, they started doing some research and showing you can. So that's kind of where we're headed, but that's the exciting thing. That's the hopeful thing. Yeah.
I love that. And so implicit memory, I did not know the difference between explicit and implicit. So that segues very nicely into the next part, which you did note again about, what was it, the schemas, where the schemas of reality teach us two things. One, what is about to happen, and two, how should I respond to that event? And you mentioned, again, I know we've covered it, but just the parents' socioeconomic status, things of that nature, which just came up for me as well. So we have that knowledge, right? And then in your next video, we go into memory reconsolidation, how to rewire our brain or relearn life. And I'll just give a quick note on this. You said, and I loved this right here. When you were first starting out as a psychologist, your father shared with you something his mentor said to him. Remember, people don't come to you with their problems. They come to you with their solutions. So you go on to talk about self-criticizing, overeating, and you say, how is criticizing or overeating a necessary solution to some problem that they have faced? So and then from there you go into explicit and implicit. But do you want to
let's expand on that, because
Sure.
some people can understand that quote and maybe some might not. So
Sure.
what he meant when he said they come to you with their problems, but really they're coming to you with their solutions.
Yes. Yeah.
He's meaning that the problem itself is a solution.
Right. That's how we've learned to adapt.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
That is what our early solutions become our problems.
Yeah.
This is just another way of saying we already talked about a bit, but like really important to see. It's like, and actually I practice something called coherence therapy. That's not as well, again, it's because it's Bruce Ecker's form of therapy and he's not a big, marketing guy. So it's not as well known as many coherence therapists, unfortunately, because some people are looking for it now. But I love learning this method. And the reason it's called coherence therapy is because you take the what quote unquote symptom. I know it's kind of a medical word, but whatever it is, the thing the person's wanting to change, shame, addiction, depression, whatever it is, you take the thing, the behavioral problem or whatever it is, and you assume that there's some learning underneath that makes it coherent. It makes it make sense. Everything makes sense based on our inner world of learnings.
Right.
There's no disorder, right? It's coherent. That's why it's called coherence therapy. So you're looking to help first just to make that conscious, which can be powerful for people. Like, how is it coherent that you're doing this?
Yeah.
Not dysfunctional, yes, of course there's costs, and those are problematic and totally. On the other hand, deeper in your brain is thinking, I better do this. It is my way of solving a problem. It's my solution. Right. If I don't rage, this other thing happens, Yeah. And that's honestly, that even just learning about that idea can be so de-shaming for people. I get it. Like I'm also emotion focused in my work, but I find it just as powerful. Like sometimes I like uncovering the emotion underneath. That's great. But I actually find it almost more powerful when people uncover the schema underneath. Like,
yes.
Oh, this is what I know there. This is why I'm doing that thing. Oh, and being able to put that into words and map out the language of it. So is it like this? I better never let anybody give me a positive attention, because if I do, it means that X, Y, and Z. And oh my God, that does feel true to me. That's true. Now that I'm conscious of, I'm like, yeah, right. On an emotional level, that feels really real.
Yeah. And a word you just said there is so important. And I've known this, but really, again, watching your videos, it just hammered it home for me in a way I needed to hear. Feel. So that leads into, if I can jump into the explicit memory versus implicit memory. So, explicit memory is learning, Is learning and remembering so you give the sample. Explicit memory, learning and remembering what the capital of France is when you're in school, right? And I loved this. Then you go into implicit memory. It's like learning to ride a bike. And you say, and this was so good. I thank you for this. Let's say while learning to ride a bike, our brains are having experiences. For instance, when I feel a slight shudder on my right side, I know I need to slightly lean left. And that is not consciously learned, but it is stored and useful to our capacity to ride a bike later on, even if we can't verbalize that as something we learned. And in the same way, we learn to ride a bike, we learn the motions of being human. And they're not conscious because they exist in the same way that learning how to ride a bike exists in implicit memories. That blew my fucking mind. And yes, I just said fucking mind because it deserved an F-bomb. When you said that, I was like, I was not familiar. Again, a lay person in this, but wow, holy shit.
Yeah. No, most therapists don't know this stuff. This is not taught at school. Yeah.
Yeah. So that explains a lot, right? I don't even, I would love to hear you elaborate in any way you want to on that point, because that's so big to me, at least. It's huge.
It is huge. It is so huge. It really touches me to see your response, because I kind of even forget I forgot already what's on this video.
We're doing your greatest hits tour right now. So thank you.
I said that. That's pretty good. No, but to see how it landed with you, because that's how it lands with me. Is like, isn't this important? Seems like we should know this. And as an example, I think I go on that video to kind of give some examples. Like, one of the things we want to keep upright is our relationships.
Yeah.
So if I see that I lean a little metaphorically right, like if I'm riding a bike and I got to come up. If I, start to express some disagreement or something and I get a really bad look, that's like almost falling off the bike. It's like, oh, that,
Yeah.
oop. And then my system's like, oh, don't do that. So
Right.
don't do that, move, and it's like, okay. And it's not that I stopped and wrote it down and learned it like I do in school. And yet it's right there. Now, this is what Bessel van der Kolk means when he says the body keeps the
Keep
score.
score, right? Yeah.
It's not really in the body. I mean, there's been a little debate about this recently because of this woman, Lisa Feldman Barrett, who I like. Actually, I think she does great. Her book is great, but she has this like challenging thing, like the body doesn't keep the score. And I was like, okay, that's a little bit, I don't know if anyone really thought it was like in the body. It just manifests in the body. We feel it. She said the body is the scorecard. That's like, okay, so that's a little bit accurate, yeah. But to me, that's like the same thing. But anyway, but if you really want to know the science, it's in the brain. It's like in our subcortical brain, we know we're keeping the score. We know we're learning all these things. We're learning how to adjust. By the way, if you care about the body piece, I don't know if I'm and emotions and all this. Like, yeah, you do.
Please,
so
yes.
It's like basically anytime our brain makes any kind of prediction of we might need to do this next, it is shifting our physiology and our musculature to prepare for that action.
Okay.
Right. So if we're going to need more energy, our fight or flight, or we call it fight or flight, but it's literally just energy. It's not necessarily fight or flight. But anyway, we have our energy come on because we're going to have to do something, right? And maybe if we knew to do a certain thing, like if we expected we're about to get hit, or we have to run, like our muscles might tense. Anyway, our bodies, as soon as we have a prediction, I think I'm going to have to do this, our body starts to ready to do that thing.
Yeah.
That feels different in our body. Then our mind notices that because it's picking up all our senses, has different kind of schemas around what all that means. And when it perceives those, that's what emotion is. So feelings are our body's best guesses of why feelings are our brain's best guesses of why our bodies is shifting.
Hence why they say feelings are not facts.
Yeah, because most of why our body is shifting is from subcortical learnings.
Right. Okay. Yes. Just making sure I'm following here.
Yeah. Yes. So you could have an intellectual idea that if it's like really compelling to you, like if I said, like there's a bomb about to go off, like I could consciously get that. It's not from my history and shifts my body and I have feelings. But the reason why sometimes we don't know why we're feeling what we're feeling is because everything we've talked about so far of all those predictions of what does this mean and what do I have to do is very closely aligned to our body because we actually care more about that than our thoughts. Like we trust more what we see through experience.
Yes. Yeah.
So anytime we're like doing something, it's filtering through our experiences. What do I predict this means I'm going to have to do? It's already preparing our body for that because it assumes that's important. And then we like suddenly are very amped or shut down or whatever our body, and they're like, why do I suddenly have a drop in energy? Or why do I feel amped up? And then we call those things our feelings. But anyway, that's good. That's a little topic of feelings, which is a separate conversation. But while we were there.
Very important. And one thing, again, a little side where Bessel came up and body keeps score. So where do you fall then on the issues are in the tissues? That's been a thing. Do you disagree with that?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I don't know. I haven't heard, I guess I need to know. I've never heard someone present that as some science behind that, but usually nothing is black and white. Like I really get, we have an indirect nervous system and our heart and around our gut can have some information processing, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't mean it's not at all in the body, but from what I usually tend to hear is most of the information processing is happening in the brain.
Brain. Cool. Yeah. And again, I don't know much about it. I think, and again, and I could be wrong, but I think certain emotions or traumas or things are stored in tissues. And that's why they have things like trauma release exercises, shaking, certain yoga, trauma-informed yoga. I don't know about that stuff, so I wasn't curious.
I'm not to be controversial against anybody else's. Those may be totally valid perspectives, but from my understanding, like even when I did some somatic experiencing training, it was like, it's stored energy in the body and I just think probably it's more just a lot of predictions happening in the brain.
Sure. Okay. And that makes sense. If you're thinking, and I'm asking, if you're thinking something is going to help, and you're doing something moving that's happening in the brain. Mm-hmm. So that's where I was going with that.
The moving can be incredibly, but okay. Well, if we talk, we could get very complex because there's a lot of reasons why moving and all these things can be not only regulating, which they can be, but potentially shift those neural networks of learning and association.
Okay.
But But before we go there, we have to kind of
Yeah.
set up what those main requirements are, because that's a hefty conversation in and of
So
itself.
let's say this. So we've got my
Okay.
recording timer is on, and it will cut us off because I extended it.
Okay.
We have 31 and a half minutes.
Okay.
I just, trust me, I don't want to cut it off of that. It's just that's how it's set up.
Yeah.
I will talk to you all day about this, but I know you have to go too.
Yeah.
I only share that because we can go there, or
Yeah.
where do you prefer?
Go.
What do we?
Yes, let's go to the basics.
Sure.
But again, we'll always learn new things. There could be some layers. This is probably simplistic, but the basics are, if you want to unlock memory reconsolidation. Do we even use that word yet? Memory reconsolidation.
No, so we were coming up to that. Okay, so that is where we're going. Yeah.
Let's go there.
Incremental change, transformational change,
you want
memory
transformation. Yeah. So I was mentioning 20 years ago, when we thought implicit memory couldn't be changed.
Right.
And then the neuroscience people started talking about memory reconsolidation.
So in your videos, it was 15 years ago.
It's 20 years ago now.
Look at you now, it's 20 years ago. So anyways, I'm sorry, I made a note of that. Because you said that's where they came up with CBT, and it was created, to help with the implicit knowing. So sorry, I digress. You go.
Yeah. I mean, CBT was before, but it was with the assumption that we can't really change how things feel directly, but we can change conscious thinking. Okay. We can't change. It's almost like if you could think of schemas as like unconscious thinking in a way, or unconscious beliefs. We have our conscious beliefs, but this is where people get confused because they are like, I know that intellectually, but it doesn't feel true.
Yeah.
I know all people deserve value, are valuable. That's my spiritual belief, even, like I foundationally believe everyone deserves love. I emotionally don't feel like I deserve love.
Yeah.
That is what we're talking about. That's the difference between a neocortex knowing that's explicit versus a subcortical implicit felt truth from lived experience.
Yeah.
So that's an example, which shows you why we want to change these things, because sometimes they're very difficult to carry around.
My energy just shifted there because that's something I've struggled with in my life, and I work with a lot of people, and not just addiction, but mental health. And one of the core things is they'll, like myself, give love all day, but when it comes to ourselves, anyway, so yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, gosh, so many places we could take this conversation, but I will say there's some really interesting thinking around also why it can feel adaptive to hold on to shame. All the fears of letting go of shame, why we even take it on in the first place as a protection, which we'll have time to get there. So let me try to be efficient in my just explaining this part.
Yep.
So the brain doesn't innately just automatically update. However, if two things happen, if we can have sort of online activated if it's okay if I can use the word neural network, it's kind of technical, but it just means like the memory. It's like that place that the memory is stored, not a conscious memory, or even event memory, but just that knowing I'm bad, that knowing if I do this, I'll get hurt. That's stored in a connection of neurons. It's called a neural network. So we need that's step one. Electricity has to be flowing down the network that we're wanting to change, which, by the way, is partly why we have to go deep in therapy. We can't just actually talk about things because we got to open the file where this stuff lives. Okay, so that's step one. Step two is the brain has to witness information that what's called disconfirms. Okay, I'm just going to use technical language for a second. Disconfirms the prediction that we're talking about, the one that we're trying to change. So we bring online the prediction. It's our brain is actively predicting if I value myself, I'm in trouble. We can bring that online, while at the same time seeing evidence that decisively, or at least it has to feel subjectively true. There's many ways to get there, but it has to feel really true, like really deeply witnessing evidence that counteracts, that disconfirms that both can't be true at the same time. It can't both be true that I need my parents to love me or else I'll, but also witnessing, my parents are deceased. It's like, sometimes it's like, wait, what? So we need two, both online at the same time. That happening, making a prediction and seeing that it is not, what's happening is not what we predicted, makes the memory labile. That's just a science word for the little proteins that hold those little electrons in place and unlock. So it's in a state where it can change.
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily change yet, but it can. Then if we introduce new knowing or learning, if we give it again, like, hey, it really is safe now, and here's the evidence for that, it can actually, this is amazing. In 2 seconds, the whole neural network can be rearranged or dissolved. What?
So if I can take a page out of your book, what really helped me understand this was the example you gave of a zip drive.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? So you talk about how we have these files on our computer, our memories, etc. They get condensed and then into a zip drive. Okay, they're there.
Yes. Right.
But we can go back into that zip drive, which is what we're talking about here. Bring it back, open it up.
You have to open it.
Yes, and then when it's open, that's what you were just talking about.
Yes.
We introduce the
this confirmation and
thank you. Because while it's open, you said, I don't know if this has changed, there's like a 5-hour window, give or take. Right. And in that opening, if we introduce that, then we're able to, once it's felt and really understood, then we can close that zip drive again and store it back in there. Yes. Problem solved. We are healed. That's fucking crazy.
It's crazy. But I have to say, I mean, there's two things. One, it really can be that crazy. I've seen amazing examples of this when it's just really well done. And then two, I do want to acknowledge, like, we have multiple schemas, and it's not like all your healing happens in 1 second. Go down to another one, and sometimes you have to do this one before it gets to this one, or like you start to do it, and then the system's like, oh no, that's going to bump me into grief. So it breaks the whole thing. Anyway, so there's a lot of complexities. I'm no way, this is sort of like not one of those like 5 easy steps to utter bliss.
Right.
It is not that at all.
Yes.
And it's really important, especially for therapists, to get that it's possible and to kind of understand why it's hard, but possible. Because it is actually not easy to have both those things on at the same time. Because when we touch into our stuff, we can get flooded. And the second, there's other side, but like the second we get flooded, we're not going to witness any disconfirming information. Like our brain just can't take in, oh no, I really do have value. Or, you know what I mean? And so it's like this dance in therapy sometimes of like, let's see if we can bring it on. But in a way, it's either slow enough, actually in somatic experiencing, they'd say titrated, like just bit by bit where there's resources. We're finding a way to kind of like bring it online and really let it feel true in our system without actually being in fight or flight. Because if we actually get flooded, then we're not in a learning state where memory consolidation can happen anymore. So this is why it doesn't happen a lot accidentally in the wild. It does sometimes, but this is why it takes kind of crafting of experiential therapy techniques that are like, on the one hand, going slow, using mindfulness. Mindfulness is huge for helping things stay on the rails, safety-wise and our nervous system-wise, regulated. So doing these kinds of things, the interpersonal connection with a therapist, hey, I'm here with you, so that it can feel safe to know like, oh, it really feels true that blah, 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 and that, wow, but I have my bandwidth. I have other parts of me online, or in the IFS, I would say my self-energy online, so that now I can really give an honest new information to that spot, and it can be received. Yeah.
So something that came up for me while I was listening to all of this is, I'm very fortunate that I have a wonderful therapist. She's great. She's very helpful. I really appreciate her. And I'm going to send her this actual conversation. I don't usually send her stuff, but Carrie, thank you. If you are listening this far, you're amazing. And I tell her she earns her every penny when she's with me. But that's, to me, if I'm going into therapy, I'm not leaving anything on the table. Like, I'm there to do the work, and I want to be well, be better. So, and thank you for doing that on your end too. So my question though is, what came up for me as I'm watching your videos, and you do share, and I couldn't agree more, the importance of having a trained professional walk you through this stuff, because it can be, there's a lot of heaviness. And left to our own devices, I could see how it could certainly do more harm than good. But that said, not everybody can afford a therapist. I know there's better help.
Find one.
Yeah, find one. That too. Even if you can afford one. I know BetterHelp's a thing. I don't know much about it. I don't know where you fall on that. But
I can tell you.
Okay. So
we get this BetterHelp.
All right.
I don't mean to be criticizing. Sorry.
No. Listen, this is a very honest podcast, and honest thoughts are welcome here. So where I'm going with this though is, okay, best case scenario, someone in my shoes has a therapist that's willing to go to these places and explore these things. That's
Yeah.
awesome. She's not trained in IFS, but she's very clear. If I wanted an IFS specific, she would get me. So I said, no, I really like you. She knows about it. We work together and it works
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
That said,
Mhm.
someone either has a therapist that doesn't want to go here, or really where I'm going with this is they don't have a therapist.
I know.
Are there things that people can
Everyone.
do to help and start
Yeah.
doing this kind of stuff? Or are they just shit out
Uh,
of luck?
no, it's such a good. I don't think there should have look, and it's one of those things where it's kind of both and of somewhere
Right, right.
somewhere in the middle.
Yeah,
Um, I get asked that a lot. Um, I don't think we have there's not great any research on it that I know about. I mean, even this stuff in therapy is very new.
yeah.
Um, and I didn't mean to make. I'm sorry if there's any better help therapists. They could be doing great work. But what I meant by that is really more like almost you're. It's just not what you'll likely find if you do if you just look for a therapist, unless maybe you look for IFS or something that's experiential. But most therapists aren't doing
Sure.
experiential work.
Right.
So, okay, so can you do it on your own? I have so many people I just sort of interface with and ask them because there's no research. Um, uh, and I get mixed stories because I trust what they're telling me. Like, just, hey, what, people been, um, but I would say it's hopeful. So let me give it depends kind of. So,
Mm,
I do say, hey, look, try out. I think IFS is the best. Like coherence therapy doesn't work really well for self help.
sure.
Or another form of therapy I do, AEDP, doesn't work well with self help at all, because it's all about the relationship with the therapist and stuff.
Mm,
IFS is especially good for self help because it is about that. What IFS is basically teaching you how to be your own therapist.
right.
So
Yeah.
better if you have a therapist teach you how to be your own therapist. But if
Right.
you don't get a book, learn the theory, like it is kind of teaching you how to be your own healer, adult support, inner parent, however you want to think about it. And there are some good, like I'll say, hey, I mean, there's actually a couple books, but the one I just happen to know, I don't know if it's the best, is like Self Therapy. There's a
Mm,
literally book called Self Therapy by Jay Early, that shows you how to do IFS on yourself, or parts
oh,
of it,
wow.
steps of it. I don't know if I don't know how far it go, but that I think, I've had so many people say this just been life changing for them.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely, just learning about it and then beginning to dabble with it and relate to themselves in these new ways and understand how the mind works and everything we just said you could put into parts language. Like
Mm,
parts language is like a kind of a, I don't know if it's simpler, but it summarizes everything we just said, but
yes.
makes it like relational instead of these are
Yeah.
predictions or schemas or knowings. It's just like, oh, a part of me has this job of making sure I never let anyone close because it learned or he learned or she learned that if you do, you'll get hurt. And it's just a lovely way of kind of saying, look, we have different knowings along our brain that are contradictory. And so we
Yeah.
call them as being owned by a part of us. Anyway, it's really elegant. I like it. It's not everyone jives with parts work, which is, but if you like the language, but if it try to see if you can get into parts work, because if you can like learn about enough about it so it doesn't seem weird and you can play with it, it's probably the best, most powerful bang for your buck in terms of individual work.
I couldn't agree more. Like I was saying earlier, I'm somewhat new to it. My friend, who is a wonderful therapist, turned me on to it. And
Mm-hmm.
learning just, first of all, the firefighters, the protectors, the
Yeah.
managers, and the exiles. It's like, and
True.
I'm a jaded human being. I'll be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Like I look at
Mm-hmm.
things very with discernment.
Skeptical. Yeah.
Yes. But also still open and curious.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My direct experience with this has been incredible. And this is again
Hey.
20 years of like EMDR
Yeah.
also, I'll be honest, I found very
Yeah.
helpful too.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Of course.
all the ART, ACT, you name it, DBT, CBT, I've been there,
Mm-hmm.
done that. And
Yeah.
they all have their place, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
But this one, I will say this. I recently watched a series that Sounds True did with Richard Schwartz and Gabor Mate. It
Mm-hmm.
was a really interesting because they were exploring IFS parts work and Mate's compassionate inquiry. And I
Mhm.
love both of those guys. Gabor
Mhm.
has been very helpful to me, and he's been on the show. And
Oh,
but
wow.
what really tickled me a little bit was Richard's this very humble guy, and Gabor is too. But he owns, like, he's important, and it's
Mm,
part of me, and I get that. But
mm,
he would kind of give Schwartz shit periodically about the
uh,
parts. He's like, "Why do we even need to name them?" But then he'd
yeah,
say, "But I get it." But then I
yeah,
don't agree. And it was
yeah,
anyways.
yeah,
I thought it
totally.
was very interesting.
Yes.
Side note. But
Yeah.
one thing that's coming up too, and again, just being mindful of our time, because I know people. Hold on, how much time do we have here? All right, 16 minutes. Um, if you don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole, I respect that. But just very quickly, context. We're talking about different kinds of therapy.
Mm,
A little over 2 years ago, just being honest here, and I have talked to us on the show. I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder. I've had depression since teenager. I've had years of sobriety. I've done everything they've told me to do, been on Lexapro, Abilify, you name it. And then
mm,
I was just dying inside. I was very
no.
suicidal, ended up in a psych hospital twice in the course of 3 months. I put myself there. There was still a
Yeah.
little flicker, like,
Yeah.
I want to die, but I don't. The
Yeah.
second time, they gave me 3 rounds of oral ketamine treatment.
Uh,
Um, yeah, but they did. The doctors were like, "Look, you're treatment resistant. There's
yeah.
this thing," and
Right.
I'd done studies because I want
Mhm.
to know about, like, what helps.
Mm,
I'll tell you, I've worked with that since, with integration counseling and my therapist, and also
mm.
psilocybin microdosing.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
been off all other medications, and it's changed my life.
Oh, so happy to hear that.
Yeah, but I
Like,
want to also say quickly, I
yeah.
understand this is delicate because I know people with certain diagnoses, it can have
Yeah.
adverse effects. So, yeah, do
Yeah.
you have any thoughts on
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. I mean, with clarity that I'm not an expert, but
Yes.
certainly talked to a lot of people who are, I try to read some and talk to
Yeah.
people and stuff in here. But I mean, I think, we'll find out over time, but I
Right.
certainly love, I'm so open
Mm.
to, like, let's be creative and find ways.
Yeah.
If we can make this more powerful so that we can, like, it doesn't have to take so long and
Yeah.
and like, oh my gosh, what, and I think, especially with, psychedelic assisted therapy, whew, I like so much potential there. Well, again, we'll,
Mm.
we'll see exactly how it plays out,
Right.
but
Right.
because everything usually is like, it's going to be more complex, and whatever. We'll find those complexities, but obviously, it's reason for huge excitement and is right in line with everything we're talking about today,
Yeah.
and that's why
Right. Right.
it's exciting. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like it's an opening to galvanize memory consolidation. Like, again, I don't know. There's different conversation around us. Do the drugs itself or the active ingredients itself open up? Blah blah blah. But certainly, the experience has huge potential to have real witnessing of a new truth that could
Yeah.
then serve as a disconfirmation for the old knowing, et cetera, et cetera. And have and I'll do I have the book right with me? No, I don't. But my mentor's book is called Unlocking the Emotional Brain.
Ah,
Best psychology book there is, Unlocking the Emotional Brain, in my opinion. And in the newest edition two, there is both editions. There's a chapter where he goes through a bunch of different therapies. I think EMDR is in there, IFS, ADP, anyway, a bunch of different therapies, including, and then this last one has psychedelic, somatic experiencing, I think. Anyway, a bunch of experiential models, that produce
yeah.
this transformational change. By the way, I didn't even say this, but let me just say it really clearly,
Okay.
clearly, both. It's fine. I'll bring it
Both.
all
Both.
in. Is that the idea is what is special about these experiential techniques is that they didn't know this as these techniques were being invented, but as we look back to that, surprise, surprise, they create moments where it's very likely for the brain to have the requirements that
Mm.
would unlock memory consolidation.
Right.
Intellectualizing about it, just insight alone doesn't do it. Trying to symptom management doesn't do it. There's all sorts of things that don't do it. But I think as people were playing around and getting these breakthroughs, they were like finding techniques
Yeah.
that basically do the exact thing. So there's no memory reconsolidation therapy. A
Yeah.
lot of times people say, like, call me like, I want memory consolidation. I'm like, that's an endogenous part of the brain. Like, and all the experiential therapies that I know of, the main ones, are brilliant at it.
Yeah.
So they're all equally brilliant. I mean, I think knowing about it helps them maybe tweak a little bit to even be more reliable, but I think they're all really good at creating those moments, including psychedelic-assisted therapy. And in that book that I love, Unlocking the Emotional Brain, he has a chapter where he just goes through each one and shows how they're doing the same thing. They're all creating moments where the implicit knowing is active. Electricity is flowing down that neural network that knows and having decisive new experience, whatever that decisively disconfirms it, holding there so it can be integrated. It's really cool to see how like all these different techniques, all these different paths of the mountain, but they're all doing the same thing from the perspective of the brain. And that's amazing.
Yes. And you did note that. I don't know if you remember or not, but you said that in your video series that like you might already or probably are doing this if you're in therapy. You just don't have the language. I'm paraphrasing, but And like I said, as I'm learning the way you're describing, it's like, oh shit. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let's see here. All right. 11 minutes. So in that video, or transformational change, deeper kind of growth. And you've been talking about that a lot already leading up to this. And one takeaway at the end, you talk about one, reactivation, and two, disconfirmation, which we've talked about. That's the big thing. And then you go into video 6, good therapy, which I think we've talked a lot about that already too. You made a point, I think it was in that video. A lot of people think they're just going to talk without intention. And another thing you said, I don't know if it was in that one or a different video, that I've experienced is when you're in therapy, having trouble naming like what's going on, emotions. Like there's times where I get stuck, even in parts work where I'm like working and listening and I ask a question, nothing comes up, that voice, and I wait. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that. I also want to give like kind of the rest of this time, the short time, I'm sorry, to you and what you're doing now versus what we've been talking about.
Yeah, no, gosh. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's the topic that comes up a lot too as I'm training therapists because I'll be like, oh, it looks so easy. Like we'll practice on each other. And it's like, yeah, but they're therapists. Like my clients look at me like I have a third eye growing out of my forehead if I ask like what's happening in your body, whatever. And sometimes it is hard. There's a number of ways to think about it. Sometimes I'll tell clients if they're struggling to like, I think of it as like what to do if clients say, I don't know. It's like that moment,
Yeah.
There's a couple ways of thinking about it. What Bruce will say, he'll say, oh, I wasn't expecting you to know. Would you like to find out together? Let's give, because people think that if they don't already know that they don't know. But sometimes really lingering with some mindfulness allows something new to come to awareness. The mind can actually show you something. Something I'll sometimes say is, wow, I notice you're struggling to like sometimes answer these questions. It's like even how to put it into words or even notice it or organize it or, it's like, what am I even? And it just makes me curious if this is new for you, if you're not used to, if you haven't in your history had someone be really curious about your true experience before. And sometimes just having that reflected is sort of emotional for people. You know what I mean? It's like they'll notice something when I say that, if it's true, because I think that's why this is so underdeveloped in us. It should be kind of a natural thing. Like we just notice what's happening inside of us and, whatever. We are so freaking neglected. Like this whole area, like we just talk about anything other than our inner world. Like it's wild. We almost like actively avoid it. Right. And so when someone just does this naturalistic thing, which is like, I mean, to me, it's like as clear as day. We have thoughts, feelings, reactions, like, something, if you just pause, like, what were you afraid of right then? Like your system will show you what it was afraid of, but it's new to people because they've never had someone really ask them about their experience.
Yeah.
And that sometimes is so like, even just reflecting, that's like, holy crap, that is weird and sad. And of course, someone should be curious about my experience. What the heck?
Yeah.
But again, sometimes a little training is needed too, because it's like, it is a new skill a little bit. Like, okay, so what I'm asking, so I'll let people know. It's like, it's no different than trying to remember anything. Remember, we're sort of like mining memory. So it's back. It's just like like when you're trying to remember something, the information is somewhere.
Yeah.
All you're doing is cueing it. And then, whoa, it magically appears. It's so mystical, but that's how that, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
it's, insight work is really no different. I just ask my brain, okay, so it's right there in the moment, but this does take a very focused kind of therapy. I think you were hinting at that a while. Just
Yeah.
randomly talking doesn't do this.
Right.
But so if a client comes in, I say, what are you wanting to work on? Describe it in detail for me, exactly how this plays out. Give me an example. Let's go into the example. Right there, it happens. Right there, you shame yourself or or don't do the paper, whatever, right there. Slow that down. Notice that moment. Right? It happens too fast in real life.
Yeah.
If we slow down and notice, say, okay, what are you thinking, feeling? Like, what are you afraid would happen if you did say no right then? Just see what occurs to you about that. It's like then the mind begins to just show it just the same way. If I like started singing a song, the next line of the song would come. Like that's how the mind works. It associates things. So if I get right there where it knows what to associate, and give it through imagery or whatever, like the association just comes, it bubbles up, but it's not mystical.
Right. That again, that example, the lyrics to a song.
Yeah.
Thank you. Clicks.
It's just asking for memory. It's just asking our memory. It's just asking our deeper mind, what do you know about this? But we can't just ask it flat. Like I couldn't say like, what's the third line of national, a song.
Right.
But I could start the song.
Yeah.
Right. So we start with what we are aware of and then see what comes next. And then we have that link. Oh, all of this. And then the next piece sort of comes because that's how memory works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So about 5 minutes left. We've I think really done a pretty good job of exploring that video series. I want to be very clear to anybody listening or watching this that that's just like one little series on your YouTube page. And I love that, yes, a lot of the videos are geared towards therapists, which I've watched some and it's still interesting to me, as somebody that's in therapy. But there's plenty of stuff I think for people that aren't therapists to glean and really to walk away with. So with these last few minutes, I give it to you. Anything that you'd like to share? What's lighting up your heart these days? I don't know.
On a quick practical level, I'll just let other therapists know I do train therapists. I have a 6 months core training. You can look at my website for that. I have some online trainings to give CUs for depending on your license and state and stuff, but sometimes I give CUs. So I do have those things, but mainly I love the YouTube because it's free. So feel free to jump on YouTube. I guess, anytime I have a chance to just say we're doing our best. Like, I know I've said it 5 times probably, but like, if there's anything that I think is like what I would want someone to walk away with is like, if that feels shaky to you intellectually, like the first step is just get intellectually, then obviously you have to integrate it emotionally. But like, if any part doubts that, keep studying about that. Keep learning about the mind because there is no shred of evidence that will ever go against that and so many that will build up for it. Like as soon as you learn about the mind, it becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. And there's lots of ways of looking at that, both logically and neurologically, that will show you that you've always done your best. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Nobody, I really hold that. There's no, it doesn't mean that guilt isn't a healthy emotion because we have to work through grief. It's really a grief process. If we've hurt someone, we have to, let ourselves process that. But holding foundationally that just by being human and having a human brain, like you did not decide to be born, and be here. I know we have a strict cutoff, so I'll try not to go on and on, but I just want to give that from my heart, like learn about that, and see if that can come in, that you are doing your best.
Yeah. What a beautiful note to end on. And that's something that you, to me, at least I listened and saw you reiterate through your videos. And that really hit my heart because, I've had people tell me times, Chris, you need to put the 2x4 down because I'm very hard on myself, which I know a lot of people are, but you're right. And what I also appreciate about your videos is I felt like, not that I need permission, but I guess I do. It's like you're giving me permission, and my therapist does this too, to be okay with, I'm just doing my best today because I know I can be doing better in myriad ways in my life. But you know what? It's hard, this human thing, and
it is very hard.
And cutting ourselves some slack, that's okay too.
And just getting curious why I'm doing this instead of getting shamed. You can want to solve it, but start with curiosity rather than critical judgment.
And shame was something we didn't really get to, we did talk
Yeah.
about, but we didn't get to dive into it. I'm going
Yeah.
to have you back on. That's just, we're going to figure that out. Cause, so I don't know, but when's your book coming out? What, I know you love YouTube, but geez, like planting a seed, Tori, I'm planting a seed.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So, but yeah, so again, on YouTube, Tori Olds, TORIOLDS, and your website is it? I don't recall. I'm sorry.
ToriOlds.com. Yep, easy.
Beautiful. So if you're on the Be Here Now page, that'll be linked. Just scroll down. You can find Tori. If you're on the YouTube page, it's easy enough to type it in. Tori, thank you so much for your time, for the work you're doing in the world, and I mean this when I say it. I believe this place is a little better, maybe a lot better with you in it, and for what you're doing. So thank you for that.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right.